Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week, our guest is the Associated Press congressional reporter and author of Storm at the Capitol, an oral history of January 6th. Couldn't be a more appropriate guest, Mary Clare Jalonick. Remember, we love taking your questions, so write to politicswarroom@gmail.com, or for next week's show, we'll get to as many as we can, and don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can also get text updates about what's next for Politicon and Politics War Room by signing up at Politicon.com. Tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And please check out the link to our sponsor, Quince, in our episode show notes. And we thank you for supporting these sponsors because it's what makes this podcast happen. James, Trump and his knee-jerk Republican followers are ecstatic over the capture of Venezuelan dictator Maduro. The military and the intelligence operation was brilliant, no question. And Maduro is a really bad guy, crooked, brutal, illicitly held office, no question. In addition to most Republicans, even some experts I usually respect, like retired General Wesley Clark, said this may really be a good thing and may send an important message to other countries. I think the downsides are greater, and I pay more attention to Ann Applebaum, Max Boot, Walter Pincus, who see really potentially grave dangers ahead. First, what was the mission? What was the purpose? What was the goal? Trump had originally said it was because Maduro was a big drug dealer, peddling fentanyl and killing Americans. Well, actually, it's not true. Maduro peddled illegal drugs, but it wasn't fentanyl, and most of it was not to the United States. Moreover, you'll recall it was just a couple weeks ago, or actually a few months ago, that Trump pardoned the former Honduran president, who really was a huge drug dealer. So the drug case was a lie. Maduro did lose the last election and then stole it. So this was about restoring democracy, maybe? No. Trump has stiffed the opposition leader, Maria Machado. First, he resents the fact that she won the Nobel Peace Prize rather than him, and he doesn't care about democracy anyway. So the new line is it's about oil. But that's a long-term prospect, and Trump wants to get his cut more quickly. One thing Trump does get right, however, James, for now, he runs it. And as Colin Powell famously said, when you break it, you own it. And there are a lot of people, bad people down there, including Maduro's interior and defense ministers who still are in control. Venezuela is not Canada, was just a bad leader. I think the polls today show the American people break even on the question. That's bad news because things, I believe, are only going to get worse.
So you hear this, people say, well, but the justification, there was justification for it. It was a massively corrupt government that did not respect election returns.
Right.
Okay? Well, under that theory, would somebody be entitled to invade the United States? We have a massively corrupt government. Our government does not believe in election returns. I mean, stop and think about it. And of course, anytime the idea, Steve Miller said, look, this is the way the world is. We reward strength. Strength is what counts. That was the way the world was until 1945. From 1945 until 2016, 17, and more accurately, probably since 2025, did say we're not just not about might. That we had treaties, we had things that you could do, you couldn't do, you were constrained. If you didn't like a regime, it didn't give you a justification to go in and change it. Don't tell me Noriega, because there's so many differences that get blue in the face explaining it. But now that we said that doesn't count, and you have spheres of influence, and good, we can take Greenland, Russia can take Ukraine, China can take Taiwan, because, well, if it might makes right, in each instance, one side has more might than the other side. But that, of course, will lead you to the first part of the 20th century. In case you forgot, it didn't go well. It didn't go well.
No, it sure didn't. I think you're right. I would hate to be in Taiwan's shoes right now, because if we say we have the right in our hemisphere to throw out a bad guy, a place that we think is being illegitimately run, the Chinese think the same thing about Taiwan. I don't agree with them, but that's what they think. their case is equally strong. And I see, some of the right-wing columnists like Eli Lake pretend that that's just sophistry. Well, it's not. And I think that's exactly. I don't think that even bothers Trump that much. I think the idea the world can be divided in 3 or 4 parts, all run by strong men like him, is something that I think he actually probably cottons to. But I think going back to Venezuela, right now, all the Maduro regime is still in charge, and they are actually arresting and harassing people who are pro-democracy. And are all those down there making bucks off of drugs? Are they going to be able to continue? Will they just be peaceful citizens as Trump runs the place? Will the bribes and shakedowns be the same? And maybe even more important, about 67%, an estimated 67% of Venezuelans voted against Maduro. They don't like that regime, which is still in place. So they're going to say, "Well, we got Daddy Don." I don't think so. So I think the oil companies are not rushing to get in. So James, I'm wondering, what is the good news ahead? What can we look to say? I don't know, on March 14th, and say, boy, things are really going to look great then.
I really have no idea. And I think every bad act is within 1,500 miles of Venezuela is pouring into Venezuela. We're seeing stories that there's violence on the streets, there's protests, there's an incompetent government, there's a lot of money to be made, there's a lot of places that you can hide. I think it's going to turn into a pit of every bad person that we can find on this hemisphere, some of them coming from out to the other side of the hemisphere. I can't imagine this guy, but I'm fascinated by it because I've reduced everything to politics. Excuse me. That's what I do. I think that Marco Rubio is stepping into one of the great traps of all time. And that they're saying he's the viceroy of Venezuela, which I don't know anybody wants that job. Of course, Trump doesn't care what he does, but Marco Rubio says he does what he does. And if you look, J.D. Vance has done a pretty good job of keeping his distance here. You can see that J.D. is making a bet that any sane person doesn't make. This thing is going to hell in a handbasket. And how lucky can I be that little Marco is the man in charge? He's the point man. I think I would just let him have that. I think there's real underlying dynamic in Republican presidential politics that's at play here. And I am not, Trump's so crazy, you don't know, but maybe remember, Rubio was really critical of Trump, as was Vance, but maybe Rubio more pointed in his critiques of Trump in 2016 than anybody else. And I don't discount the possibility.
Small hands.
Yeah, small hands. Yeah. I don't discount the possibility that Trump, and I hear this shit all the time. Oh, I heard Mark Halpin was on Smirconish this morning saying, there's a lot more strategy behind what Trump does than the mainstream press. Oh, come on, man. Give me a fucking break. Strategy behind what? But there might have been a strategy in letting old Senator Marco out there to dry. I don't know. But I just make that possibility that this is a real opening salvo in a 2028 Republican presidential nominating process.
I think that's right. I would say, as a quick aside, having worked with Mark Halpern and watched him now, I don't believe a goddamn thing he says. So, but that is an aside. I think Marco's, the thing he cares about the most is Cuba. Now, I'm not sure Cuba may not be in trouble. Cuba was getting its oil from Venezuela. I don't know where they're going to replace it. I'm not sure China and Russia really want to run to Cuba's defense. They may. But I think that's what Marco mainly cares about. But, Viceroy of Venezuela, no, that's not what you want. James, the other thing, Trump is full of hubris now. And he's talking about Greenland. We're going to go. And I've always thought that's just Trump bluster. And I still basically do. If he really wanted to do something in Greenland, he could just expand the bases that we have there now. I mean, that's easy to do. If he were to try to take over Greenland by force or not, that would end NATO, because they're a Danish country, and they're part of Denmark. Denmark is a NATO partner, and the Article 5 says if one country is assaulted, then everybody comes to their defense. Trump doesn't have any beliefs, James. People said, well, he's an America firster, so he's an isolationist. Well, he's an isolationist unless, force is easy. That's why Venezuela worked. It's all about him. And so therefore, I don't know there's any great strategy for Greenland or any place else. And I don't think there was any strategy for Venezuela. This is just a very simple bottom line. Everything Trump does is all about him and making money.
Well, you'll never convince me that Venezuela was not about Epstein. They got 2 million more files. You know how many mentions there were of the Epstein story, let's say, in the week leading up to Venezuela compared to the week after? Would be breathtaking. In his mind, this has worked. Now, the Greenland stuff, I go back to what I say is, if the theory is might makes right, is what Stephen Miller is the White House articulation of the theory, then any strong nation is entitled to take any less than strong nation. We did that in history, and it led to catastrophic consequences. Post-1945, we said we'd do things different. We'd try to set up rules, order for international relations, and very stringent demarcation between you couldn't invade a sovereign nation, you had to recognize the sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera. And, we had stupid wars from 1945 through 2025, but they weren't they were just stupid. They weren't like World War I or World War II, which was on the stupid scales you can't even imagine. And so we'd known relative peace for that whole time. And now that era might be gone. I tried. It worked pretty good.
If Stephen Miller is right, and that's American policy, what case is there against China taking Taiwan?
Well, what's the case if I'm 81 years old? Okay, I walk out of my condo, and a 19-year-old decides that this guy's got money in his pocket. He possessing it is not as strong as I am. He beat his ass in a second. He's scared to death of me. I'm just going to say, give me your money. I'm going to slug you in the face. So I'll give him my money, obviously. And that's essentially the way the world used to operate. That's the way that Stephen Miller thinks the world operates. We changed that world for the better. That no, you're not in possession of that. And just because you're stronger than me and can beat my ass, you're not entitled to that. That's just what happened in foreign policy. And we're saying, no, let's go back to if he's stronger than you and beat your ass, and you got to turn over your money to him, provided we get a cut. Provided we get a cut.
Oh, that's a big provided. Yeah. I mean, that's man.
And 25% in this transaction, James.
That in Trump world is called the ball game, James.
Yeah, you see, this for him, this for you. You know what I mean? That is.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's why you know a lot more than I do about oil, just living in Louisiana. But I think there are a lot of skeptics that the oil industry has a whole lot of interest in investing billions in Venezuela right now. And it won't be a short term, it'll be a long-term project. And again, Trump's got to get his cut.
Okay. So I'm hardly an expert, but I have friends in all business. I understand a little bit about it. First of all, it's a very hard business to run because what you do today may not see effect for 7 years. So if you just say, okay, there's oil here, and if we go to do it, we got to assume that if the price of oil is the equivalent of $2,026, $78 a barrel, you can make money. Anything under that, you're going to lose some money. But if it goes up, you're going to make a good, unbelievable money. That decision is made 7 years into the future. And that means the government has to be stable. Everything has to be just right. The other thing that I'm told by people in industry, the oil is described as sweet or sour. If the oil is described as sweet, it means it doesn't have a lot of byproducts. It doesn't have a lot of sulfur. So when you go in a refining project, it's easier to do. It has less consequences. I am told that a large amount of the Venezuelan oil is sour. It's not as valuable. It's more toxic. It's more environmentally bad. And of course, you don't have to tell me. I don't have to tell you where the refineries are that take the Venezuelan crude, because they're in Louisiana, because the shit we get, they're going to give it to us. And so, for a lot of reasons, I don't know if this is a great idea. And then, of course, Trump is seizing them for the oil companies. Well, it did get a lot in international court, and the next president's a Democrat, going to say we don't have a right to seize any country's oil and give it to our oil companies. That's not right. Under what theory did we go in and seize it? Max Boot said during the Iraq War, people say it's about oil, and they were very careful not to mention it. They were very careful to have, the oil was going to stay in Iraq and everything else. Now, yeah, it's all about the oil. We're going and take it. I'm taking it. They're going to have to pay me. And remember the meeting at Mar-a-Lago during the campaign that Harold Hamm had, when they said, if you give me $1 billion, I'll let you do whatever you want. I wonder if there's not some aftermath to that holy transaction.
Well, I'm shocked, of course, but I'm sure there is, except, as you've noted and others, I'm not sure the industry is crazy to get to Venezuela.
I don't either. No, Daniel Yergin knows more about this than 15 people, and I hadn't seen what he's written yet. I'm sure he has, but he's of the opinion that these guys are not at all chomping at the bit to get down there.
Right. Just going to close on the political note. As I say, I think the polls, if I were Trump, I would be discouraged by these polls. After Iraq and after Noriega, 70, 80, 90% of the people support it. The beginning is always easier. And if this is the same, then the fact that they're at best at kind of 50-50 or one-third is really bad news.
Well, yes, I think you even spinning it is better news than it is. And the big number is the third support. Mm-hmm. And anybody given the option is going to say everybody, it's amazing that a third didn't take the option and just said it's flat out bad. But, if you look at, to be fair, when you watch a lot of the commentary, well, based on what we know now, it's not going to come out well. Everybody's kind of hedging. Well, maybe they'll come in and they'll set up a new regime, and it'll all be milk and honey, and that's not going to happen. Okay, please. But, people like to hedge on that. The one thing that been my experience in Venezuela, and I point this out, this was some time ago, I did not detect food insecurity. No, I didn't see massive, any kind of evidence that there was hunger. It was poverty, like, yes, but would not, there's no place that you would want to be. But I did not see emaciated kids. I've been hidden from me. My airport to downtown Caracas, to meetings, to some restaurant, and back to the airport. But you might be buying into a lot of food insecurity here, because they import a lot of this stuff. And I don't know if this thing could go very, very poorly.
Yeah, and the idea of having to pour billions of dollars into Venezuela right now is not something that's going to help them.
What about the money we put into Argentina? By the way,
took care of those bonds.
Citgo, which was the Venezuelan oil company, Paul Singer just bought a big stake in Citgo. He's also the guy that made all the money on the distressed Argentine bonds. And as you recall, he's also the sainted man that had an empty seat on his G5 at Dulles Airport, but graciously allowed Justice Samuel Alito a seat on the airplane to go, which just happened to be a high-end fishing trip at some lodge in Alaska. But that would be the same person. But we wouldn't want to talk about that, would we? We would talk about his stake in Citgo and how much more it's worth and how much they're going to go through it, because, well, that wouldn't be right. And you wouldn't talk about a Supreme Court justice because, as I'm told by the chief for Supreme Court correspondent at CBS, is you can disagree with them, but you really can't say that they're corrupt. Yeah, I can say they're corrupt because all the evidence points to that.
Well, and I'm sure Mr. Singer would not like to be reminded in the spring of 2016, he was the one that first put up the money to try to dig up dirt on Donald Trump before he got the nomination.
That became,
right.
Yeah. So this guy, he's interesting, and he seems to be at the center of a lot of this, from Argentine bonds to Venezuelan oil, to Alaska fishing trips, to 2016. There's a lot here. Gee, I wonder why somehow or another, we just can't seem to talk about this gentleman.
Well, we can change that. This is, let's just, every week, let's do a Venezuela check, James. Sometimes we can just do it in 30 seconds, but let's just see how things are going in every week.
Find your fashion with Quince. They really look good. They're really well made at the affordable. If you want to talk about the affordability crisis in textiles, well, I got a solution for you. Quince.
Yeah. And the new year's the perfect time for new fits. And with the cold weather, now's the moment your winter wardrobe really has to deliver. That's why we recommend you start your seasonal reset with pieces truly made to last season after season from Quince. Quince brings quality together, premium materials, thoughtful design, and enduring quality. So you stay warm, you look sharp, and you feel your best all season long. Now, Quince has everything you need to upgrade your fashion, like men's Mongolian cashmere sweaters, wool coats, leather and suede outerwear that actually hold up to daily wear and still look good. Their outerwear is especially impressive. Think down jackets, wool coats, and Italian leather that keep you warm when it's actually really cold. It feels great knowing that each piece is made from premium material by trusted factories that meet rigorous standards for craftsmanship and ethical production. Plus, Quince cuts out the middleman and the traditional markups to deliver the same quality as luxury brands, so they can do it at a fraction of the price. The result is classic styles you'll love that hold up year after year. The fits are perfect, the fabrics are incredible, and the style and options are unmatched. James looks great in that cashmere sweater. It's perfect gift for crisp air when he's outside on his farm. But my Quince favorite is their luxurious stretch wool dress pants. They feel amazing, and they are perfect for getting things done on the hill, meeting with a source, or just reading and watching a game by the fire in a recliner. Check them out and see what your favorite will be. Now's the time. Refresh your winter wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/warroom for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. We also have some good news. Quince is now available in Canada also. That's QUINCE.com/warroom for free shipping and 365-day return. Again, quince.com/warroom. The link also is in our show notes. James, we could not have a more appropriate guest this week, 5 years after the terrorism on January 6, 2021. Mary Clare Jalonick has written a very important book, Storm at the Capitol. And although millions of words have been written and miles of videos, she takes us through the eyes, almost, it seems like real time, of the players, the members, the police, the rioters, and the press. And she captures so well the panic and the courage of that infamous day when Trump encouraged a mob to try to overturn the election. So, Mary Claire, I just think you did a fabulous job. I'm sure you worked on it for a long time. Your first interview, I believe,
Thank you so much.
was on January 6th on the way out of the way out of the Capitol that day. So you've been working on this for a while.
That's right.
Let me start before 1 p.m. that day, as when Trump was encouraging the mob to go up to the Capitol. There was not a sense of calm, but there really was a sense that it's not going to be a bad day. Both members, the police, the protesters, that they really weren't anticipating the bloody violence ahead, were they?
That's right. I mean, I think it was more, I interviewed Nancy Pelosi for the book, and the way she phrased it was, we expected mischief in terms of process, but we never expected violence. And I think that's where people were focused, were, what was Pence going to do? Would he try to somehow delay the election, or, somehow delay or block the results? And it really was that we knew that there were going to be protesters outside, but I think people really thought that would be handled by the police, and it certainly didn't think that people would be breaking in. So, I think people thought there might be a lot of people around in terms of protests, but not the kind of violence that we saw, or really any violence at all.
One of my favorite, you mentioned Mike Pence, who was the vice president and chose, I think, with great courage to follow his constitutional duty and not try to overturn the election. But one of my favorite quotes there was Jamie Raskin, who said, I had worried about what Mike Pence was going to do, and I should have worried about the people trying to hang Mike Pence.
Right. I think that there was just total focus on that. And even after Pence sent out a letter, he sent out a letter right about 1:00, which is when the certification of Biden's victory was beginning. And so people knew at that point, a lot of people said, who I interviewed, we breathed a great sigh of relief, because that meant that he wasn't going to try to overturn the election. But at the same time, people were really focused on the proceedings. And it's just sort of like, someone described it like an island inside the House chamber. And that's where I was as well. And, people really weren't focused on what we didn't really know what was going on outside, almost until the next day, how bad things had gotten out there. And what's really amazing in looking at the timeline of it is that there was violence. People were already breaking through barriers before the certification even started, but everything was sort of going along inside the Capitol as if nothing was happening outside.
Right. And just about that mood, we talked about the earlier mood at 1:00. As those protesters, rioters reached the Capitol, the mood changed quickly. And was that just, they vastly outnumbered the police. Was there any spark? Was it Pence? Was it Trump going after Pence? Was there anything that really produced what one officer called as vicious and violent assault?
Yeah, I think, Democrats who voted to impeach, and some Republicans who voted to impeach Trump, just a week later said that Trump incited that with his speech on the mall, where he told them to fight like hell. He also told them to peacefully walk down the mall, but he, had said several times as well, fight like hell. A lot of people say that that's what it was. A lot of people came already set on violence. There were several groups who knew what they were doing and, had plans once they got to the Capitol to sort of, one thing I found was sort of interesting in terms of recreating this hour by hour was sort of seeing how that tactical kind of assault on the Capitol worked. For some people, they were just, caught up as part of a mob, but others really got there and they were watching and trying to figure out how they were going to get in. They knew they wanted to get in and stop the count. So, that was, I think there were a variety of motivations there, but definitely some people knew what they were doing.
Mary Claire, as recently as this week on his website, Trump lied about it and tried to pretend it was a peaceful protest. People shouldn't forget how really violent, how really bloody and violent. I think it was Officer Daniel Hodges who told you that they grabbed my face mask and used it to beat my head against the door. A number of those cops, like Michael Fanone, thought they were going to be killed by the mob. And yet, some of your quotes from the rioters, the protesters, were almost surreal. I think I had the name right. Jason Riddle, who was a New Hampshire correction officer, and mailman told you he was upset. The police are gassing a peaceful protest, even though I'm no longer a peaceful protester.
Yeah, I really like that quote from him because he was sort of looking at that in hindsight, realizing what was in his mind at the time, and then looking back on it with perspective, which I thought was really interesting. Because I think a lot of them thought that they were like, why are they pushing on me? Why are they fighting me? And that's certainly what this White House website says, is that the mob became angry and violent because they were being attacked by police officers. But in reality, the police officers were trying to, they were trying to prevent the protesters from getting into the building because they really aggressively came up on the police officers who were really outnumbered, did not have nearly enough people out in front of the Capitol, and pushed past them violently, very quickly.
I'm going to turn it over to James, but Trump blames Nancy Pelosi for not having adequate forces at the Capitol. That's not right, is it?
Well, I mean, Nancy Pelosi called for the National Guard along with Mitch McConnell, who was equally responsible to Nancy Pelosi because he was the Republican Senate leader. She called for National Guard as soon as they asked her to after the violence began. What happened beforehand was the Capitol Police Board, that sort of obscure board that overseas security, decided not to call the Guard before. Those people the sergeants at arms who are on that board do answer to Pelosi and McConnell, but Pelosi said she wasn't consulted before that. I think that, there's a lot of things that people say, but, I interview Pelosi's chief of staff, really look at a lot of those sort of background officials who were going through that day, and they're really trying to get the National Guard there. I mean, I think one thing that everyone agrees on is that there were delays at the Pentagon later in the day that, it was like 5 hours before the National Guard actually got there.
James.
So when I was a young man, I read a book. It had a real effect. It was called the Oxbow Incident. And it was about people out west. It was a Western. Basically, there was a horrific murder and the mob took over. And sort of good people, it wasn't just, it was a bad mob. It was people that got sucked up into the moment.
Right.
And it always kind of impressed me, the sort of mob mentality. And so it's my theory, and comment on this, that a lot of the people that were in that Capitol when they started, they didn't have that intention. But as the psychology of the mob started taking over, they were doing things that they would ordinarily never do in their own lives. Is that a kind of fair observation or what?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there were like a really diverse set of people who were there that day. And, as just saying, like there were people who went there set on violence, set on stopping the count. And then there were other people who just got caught up in it. And one of the officers I interviewed talked about that is, when you get this sort of combination of, he talks about, right-wing protesters and how they can be really, he sort of compared fighting Antifa to fighting right-wing protesters. And he said they'll sort of look you in the face and, they're not, they're very aggressive. And that sort of combination of that plus the mob mentality can really make into a dangerous crowd. Clearly, something happened there where everyone got whipped up. That doesn't mean that there weren't people who also knew, wanted that to happen and were agitating that and counting on that.
So, then on that day and days after January 6th, I would hear this a lot, that there were people in the Capitol Police Force who were actually sympathetic to him, that they a few people waved a few people in. And of course, it's my belief that if you took the Capitol Police Force and how they voted in the 2020 election, I think Trump would have done substantially better than Biden did. How can I prove that? I can't, but I'm just political instinct. But were there some people on the Capitol Police Force who at least originally were sympathetic to what the rioters or protesters or whatever we want to call them were aiming for?
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly in the days immediately after. That was definitely like a narrative that people were talking about. In talking to police officers, I think most of them, I mean, really, honestly, they were just so overwhelmed that I think some of the video of them letting people by or whatever they were trying to prevent more violence.
Triage. Just triage.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, that's certainly what people I've talked to have described. I think you're right that there are still, talking to police officers, they say that there are some of their colleagues, even those who were there, who still do support Trump and who wouldn't maybe describe it in the same way that they do. But I think, in evidence of all the investigations since, there really isn't a lot of evidence that police officers let them in or were in any way conspiring. If there were a couple there, maybe, I'm not sure.
Right.
But certainly the vast number of them were in like hand-to-hand, like medieval combat with these people, trying to push them back and prevent them from breaking into the Capitol.
I mean, there were incredible acts of cowardice that day. I mean, Josh Hawley raising his fist outside the protesters, then running like a jackrabbit inside when they came in. But there were, there also was some toughness. I mean, when Trump said he might come to the Capitol with a mob, I love this quote. Nancy Pelosi said, "I hope he does. I want to punch him out."
Yeah, that's from her video. Her daughter was with her filming a documentary, which you can now watch. And that was shown in the documentary and shown in that January 6th committee. And I asked her about that quote. And, I think when I interviewed her, I was sort of almost like just sort of, I implied she was joking when she said that. And she said, I wasn't joking. It was self-defense. She was like very serious about it. So, she was obviously very, very angry in that moment. And, especially, I don't think anyone wanted Trump to come to the Capitol. And you had, sort of in both chambers, people preparing and actually like talking to parliamentarians and security people about what are we going to do if Trump does come to the Capitol? Is he allowed in? Do we have to admit him? And then the answer was yes. I mean, he could have come in. So they were really preparing for that. And I talked to Roy Blunt, who was then the chairman of the Senate Rules Committee, and he was sort of informing people about what they were going to do. They informed Pence, that this might happen and that he just said this on the Mall. So, there were a lot of like internal background things going on, just trying to figure out what was going to happen and how they would respond.
Yeah, they should have realized he was a coward. He never would have come up there. But back to the main actors, another guy I was fascinated by. I think I better have the name right. Doug Jensen, Iowa construction worker. He voted twice for Obama, you write. And by January the 6th, he had become a QAnon devotee. And there were other Q followers. I mean, I consider them the crazies. Tell us did Jensen tell you about his evolution and change?
I actually did not interview him. I would say about half of this oral history is my own interviews, and the other half is from court records,
right?
Other public testimony and things like that. And Jensen's interview was actually an FBI interview. It's pretty interesting. That was released. Not all of these FBI interviews are released, but his was. He went home and he actually went voluntarily to the FBI office and then had an interview with them. And it was a really interesting, long interview that he had with them. And he really talked about how he sort of started looking at this stuff online and some of the WikiLeaks with Hillary Clinton. He supported Hillary, and then he started reading some of those WikiLeaks releases and really got caught up in a lot of, some of the conspiracy theories around all of that. And so really turned to Trump there. At least this is what he told the FBI that day. So, I thought that was pretty interesting that he was a really public face. I think people remember him sort of chasing Officer Eugene Goodman up the stairs with a huge Q on his shirt. And he was actually someone who did once vote for Obama and, talked about how he supported Obamacare. And he thought it was good that people got health insurance. But really, once he started sort of reading, he described kind of coming home at night and looking at his phone and looking at all this stuff, and that it really did turn him around.
Mary Claire, and you captured this, there were some real heroes that day. The Capitol Police, some of whom later died, scores, well over 100 injured. And I think it was Michael Fanone who said he was pleased or proud that no member of Congress had to endure the suffering that those police did. And that's because the cops protected them. Despite the fact that Trump the other day blamed the police for part of what happened. But that was a real act of extraordinary courage. Mike Pence was courageous. He was under a lot of pressure. And I think Pelosi and McConnell insisting on staying until we finish our job late into the night. And also the press. Mary Claire, you kept filing after hearing the gunshot that killed one of the mob trying to get on the House floor. I mean, it just, I am very admiring of what you and a number of your colleagues did that day.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that's sort of all we know, right? I mean, one thing that was interesting is I was in the House gallery, and I was in the balcony with a bunch of lawmakers and other journalists. We were sort of trapped there for a little while rioters were surrounding the chamber, and then there were people trying to get in down below, like banging on the doors. There were guns drawn. It was definitely like a scary situation, but I think that I'm just being a reporter. I'm so naive. I'm not used to these kinds of situations. I didn't really I was just trying to do my job and not fully processing maybe what was going on. And interviewing a lot of the other lawmakers who were there was really interesting to me because I realized like how much they understood about what was happening that I didn't. There were a lot of people there with significant national security backgrounds. Val Demings was a Florida congresswoman, and she was the former chief of the Orlando police. Jason Crow was a former Army Ranger. Mickey Sherrill was a Navy helicopter pilot. These people, like, they know, they're very trained, and they knew, where the shot was coming from and that we were surrounded and all of that. And I think sometimes just being a reporter, it was easy to just kind of do what I knew and not totally, realize what was going on is probably helpful to me in the end.
Yeah, that shot we talked about was the one that killed Ashley Babbitt, who was one of the protesters. And I think it was terrible. I think it's very sad that she was killed. But she was shot because she was breaking the law. She was trying to get in the House chamber and interrupt a lawful proceeding. And as I say, I think it's awful that she died, but it wasn't like that she was just minding her own self that day.
Yeah, she was trying to crawl in a window that was was into the speaker's lobby, basically, which is immediately adjacent to the chamber. And there were still people, obviously, members in the chamber. So the officer who shot her, Michael Byrd, said, that he had trained his whole life for that day. And he was obviously very distraught after that happened. It was a very chaotic scene. There were barricades. He was waving the gun. There were so many people there. And it was an incredibly chaotic scene. And, it's tragic that it happened in the end.
James?
So, I do have one question. Jack Smith testified under oath that without Trump, this event would have not happened. That he was the catalyst that took it to reality. Do you agree with Mr. Smith?
Well, I don't know that I'm supposed to agree or disagree.
But I think do whatever you feel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a reporter, so I have to sort of look at the situation, right? But I mean, certainly the people who broke into the building were echoing Trump's lies that there was a stolen election. The election was not stolen. Every state bipartisan election officials certified the results. William Barr, who was Trump's own attorney general, said there was not enough fraud to overturn the election. So, there's no. It was about Trump, right? I mean, you can't talk about this like it doesn't involve Trump because they were trying to. There's a quote in the book from Angus King, and I don't know why it's so obvious, but I hadn't really thought of it this way before. But he was saying, that the rally was called Stop the Steal. And, that meant something. They were trying to stop the electoral count. Trump was the one who originally talked about that. And they were there to try to overturn the election.
Well, thank you. And you've written a consequential book. And I think that this is going to be a topic that's going to be written about for a long time in the future. And congratulations, you probably got to work that everybody will start from there when they do the next 150 books on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much.
No, I echo James. I think looking back 5 years later, frankly, it's depressing. Trump paid no price. There would not have been a riot. I don't mind saying it without him. The criminals who beat the police, brutally beat some of the police, they've all been pardoned. And some of those cops still suffer. And polls show more than half of Republicans believe it was a peaceful protest. But, I hope everybody out there will read Mary Claire's book, Storm at the Capitol, because you, in typical, straight down the middle AP style, just report the news of what it is. And frankly, it's chilling. It's just chilling to read some of those comments from the rioters as well as the police. But thank you for being with us, Mary Claire. And you've written a terrific book, Storm at the Capitol.
Thank you, ma'am.
Huge compliment. Thank you so much.
All right, now for the outrage of the week. Our esteemed producer hates it, James, when we talk sports, unless it's the English Premier Club. He especially hates it when we talk about the real football, American style. So I'm going to be in his doghouse. I know there are more than a few dumb pro football owners. Danny Steiner was one. Maybe the worst is Woody Johnson of the New York Jets. He's just a laughingstock. But I thought the owner of the Baltimore Ravens, Steve Bisciotti, was one of the smarter ones. But then he fired John Harbaugh this week, one of the premier coaches who in 18 years has won a Super Bowl, won over 60% of his games, made the playoffs most year. This year he did not when his star quarterback missed games with injuries. And even then, he only failed to make the playoffs in the last game at the last second when his field goal kicker was a foot or two wide on what would have been a winning kick. There are 6 other vacancies in the National Football League right now, coaching vacancies, and I suspect John Harbaugh is on the top of the list for most of them. Just John Harbaugh, don't go to the Jets.
I saw the story. I was surprised as you were. I just wonder if there's something else we don't know, but I don't know because it doesn't make a lot of sense. He had done his last 4 years had not been all that great, but better than most teams. And over the course of time, that guy can coach. But I just wonder if there's not another element here. Maybe some of the people in the locker room didn't want him back. I maybe didn't get along with the GM. I don't know. But I shared the shock. So for my outrage, I'm actually going to give praise to a journalistic entity. The site it's called Daily Kos or Kos, K-O-S.
Kos.
It's been around for a long time. It definitely, I would say it's to the left of me. It believes in, it's very like community, citizen activism. Very nice people, but I never thought, by and large, tended to be naive. And they posted a piece, and I can't bring it up, but it wasn't written by a specific person, that said, look, the most important thing we got to do is win the election. We have to put everything aside. And I'm paraphrasing it, but I'm not very far off. We put everything aside and just focus on winning elections and nominating the most electable person. Thank you, Daily Kos. Thank you so much. You're making the money point here. I don't care if I disagreed with you a little bit on this. I disagree with you a lot, but and you have to lead with that point because you have credibility making it, and you have to impose it and be sure that we do everything we can to maximize our opportunities to win elections in 2026. That's all we're about. I'm so happy that your community and the piece was written, but I don't know how they do it, but it was the community wrote it. So they're very communitarians, I guess, and they want sort of one purpose. But I thought the piece was brilliant. Congratulations.
Now for our listener questions. This is a segment we love because they are so good. James Mike in Louisville, Kentucky says, beyond making corruption a centerpiece of the 28 Democratic agenda, should we offer a plan for how we're going to claw back ill-gotten gains from the people who traded their support for favors from Trump?
Well, I love Louisville. It's good to hear from you. And my idea is this, and take it to believe it if you want. Have a real accounting. Everybody gave money to Trump, gave money to the stupid ballroom, gave money to the Kennedy, to all Trump entities, and get a total. But let's just say that country is the XYZ widget company. And I would make it clear that you supported Trump and Trump entities to the tune of $100 million. When you give $150 $15 million to a designated foundation or charity, you will get no meeting with anybody in this administration to discuss anything about the federal government's relationship with the XYZ widget company. But we're going to move on and allow you to do your penance to make up for the stupidity of what you did. And if you do that, we will at least listen to what you have to say. Absent that, you literally don't exist in the minds of this government.
Hope they do it.
Not do.
Bob in Boise, Idaho asks, is there a chance of Donald Jr., Melania, or another Trump running in 2028? Bob, no. They won't. Sorry, I mean, Melania would never run for anything. But let me tell you this. This is just obviously conjecture. But come 2027, Trump is going to realize he's going to hate to give up the limelight. And it's going to be driving him crazy. And I would not put it beyond him. He still is likely to have a lot of clout within the MAGA movement in the party. And particularly if Rubio is running against Vance or somebody else is, Cruz is, I would not put it beyond Trump to say, okay, I'm going to support the person that takes Donald Jr. on the ticket. It's an insane idea. But of course, insane ideas are not foreign to Donald Trump.
I have a little bit of a different take. And I'm going to give, this is the advice I'm going to give to potential 2028 candidates. I believe, and think about this, when even 27, toward the end of 27, the last thing that people are going to talk about or hear about is Donald Trump. The Trump fatigue, the Trump revulsion, the Trump disgust, the just sheer idea that somehow or another we can get away from this. And I would say, starting with Halloween of 2027, if I were advising a candidate, I said, every time you use Trump's name, you got to put $1 in a jar. And we can't have more than $21 in the jar at the end of the week. Why do I say 21? Because, well, you got 3 times a day you can mention it. That's it. That's it. And you can maneuver against him and you just say, look, every person here understands exactly what this threat is. Every person here feels the same way. But somebody wants a conversation about themselves and their future, and it's incumbent on me to give you that conversation. I really, really believe this. And I think we're right now when the anti-Trump frenzy and people that are the most clever attacks on Trump are the ones that are getting kind of public recognition. I think the political climate is going to be, people are just sick and tired of this son of a bitch, and they just would rather not talk about him. Now, investigate him, yes. But I think people want to move on, and that desire is going to be so manifest, it's going to really, really have an effect on the election.
Well, I agree. We're talking past each other because I think that's true. I think he will still have clout among some of the avid MAGA types. And if he makes a demand on a Republican potential nominee, it could be death for the general election. But, he will not be an inconsequential figure in that group. It's a minority of a minority. And I wouldn't put anything beyond it.
Would I put anything past him? But I just think we however bad shape he is in now, I don't think we can calculate what it's going to be like going forward.
Yeah.
And it's already, you can see that it's loosening in MAGA bad. A lot of MAGA doesn't like it. It's an interesting thing is when you look at what a lot of them are saying, they're really divided over there. I mean, really, really, and divided it in very, very rigid ways that we don't quite understand because we don't live in that culture. But the Spectator, which is a big kind of right-wing journal, it was a big anti-Clinton thing. It's been around forever. I just picked up the latest issue. I wish I had it in front of me. In a number of anti-Trump articles in there.
Wow.
It was just presupposed. It was just, the magazine literally supposed that who's to vote for the crack up of MAGA? They said it's already happening. That's the Spectator.
Right.
But we way because we don't pay attention to right-wing media or right-wing politics. A lot of people don't fully appreciate how big the current fissures are in that kind of MAGA world, if you will.
On all kinds of issues, anti-Semitism. There are huge fights going on that. And I'm sure, and there are going to be huge fights within a couple weeks, if not sooner, on Venezuela. It's just. And what some people out there don't really realize is they think that the right-wing media is Fox News. Fox News is very important. It's very big. But there is a whole slew of right-wing media influences. Obviously the late Charlie Kirk. But Ben Shapiro and
Megyn Kelly.
Yes. Candace Owens. I mean, it's a huge group.
Joe Rogan, I'm not sure he's a real right winger, but he's a real whatever. He's got real power.
He's more interesting and smarter, I think, than most. That's for sure.
Look at Steve Bannon.
Yeah.
He's probably just, honestly the smartest one over there. But I mean, the whole thing is crumbling.
Well, James, he'd be better off with you if he took a bath, I guess. You've said that several times.
I never heard from Stevie on my debate proposal, man. Come on.
I know.
Let's talk about Rob Ryan and let's talk about Charlie Kirk. And you're not going to win that. You ain't going to win that argument. By the way, why can't you think of the name of your own podcast?
He stole yours, James. He stole yours.
Well, I stole it from somebody else, so I guess everybody can steal it from me.
All right, I was probably not right that I steal questions from New Orleans, but I'm going to. John in New Orleans asked, by ignoring or outrightly justifying the corruption of the food and child care scandals in Minnesota, will Democrats turn this into the latest woke debacle by arguing it isn't so bad or it's a racist attempt to smear Somali Americans? John, if they did that, you'd be absolutely right. I think they're not going to do that. I think Tim Walz's decision not to run for re-election is an important one. And I think now there's a very, very good piece by Jonathan Cohn in the Bulwark on what this is really all about. And it wasn't just all Somalis, although they certainly played a role. And it really is a bad scandal. It can't be swept under the rug. And I think it's really important now that the Democrats, as well as Republicans, acknowledge that and go after it. The previous U.S. attorney did. The current U.S. attorney is doing that. And anyone who wants to downplay it, I think, is making a huge mistake.
I agree. And what I hear all the time in the media is, well, they say that you can't talk about this issue. This issue is being undercovered. Well, you're covering it right now.
Yeah.
You're covering it by saying, I don't know. It's certainly 100% awareness of this among any Democrat that I know. It's been all over the media. But the greatest bogeyman to say, they won't allow you to say this, but fraud is bad. I will just go out and say this. Now, you can't say this in modern America, but I'm courageous enough to tell you fraud is bad. Fraud is even bad when it's in Minnesota. Yes, I'm listen to me. Fraud is bad. I'm courageous. Right? I think that the governor did make the right decision. I just would bet anybody, yes, there's something here. At the end of the day, I would bet anybody without knowing anything other than history that something will be there, but will not be the magnitude of what we told.
Well, Jonathan Cohn, the Bulwark, who I don't know him, but boy, he is good.
I don't know him either.
He said that the Minneapolis Star-Tribune has been covering this extensively for years. I mean, that's the local paper.
Well, you always throw something in now, but God damn it, no one covered it. Yeah, the biggest newspaper in Minnesota has been covered it. You just can't. You always got to be the naysayers. You always got to be negative about everything. You always want to come with your stupid ass facts, and no one wants to hear that. We want our story. They've just let this go, and Minnesota got caught up in a twirl of communism and I don't know shit.
I just love James. I love woke. I just love woke.
Yeah, absolutely. And oh my God.
Our next question comes from Bliss in Joe McCarthy's hometown, Appleton, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Good question. Should Democrats change their strategy at all in light of the Wall Street Journal December 30th article stating that Mar-a-Lago sourced Jeffrey Epstein's supply of young women? That's a really good piece, and it did say that. It said that basically Epstein got his women. He would send the nefarious Ghislaine Maxwell over, and they would get women who were working in Mar-a-Lago and bring them over to Jeffrey Epstein. Some of them were as young as 16 years old. And it is true that by 2000 or by 2003 or 4 that Trump kicked him out. But he must have known this was going on. And one woman came back and said she was sexually assaulted after she went over to Epstein's, one woman from Mar-a-Lago, and they never reported that to the police. I'm sorry for that long buildup, but it really was a great story that kind of got lost in the holidays. So I guess the question after my long buildup from Bliss is, should that affect how Democrats talk about this?
Look, I think the way that America talks about this, it's important that what's read to court is, yes, this is a story about horrific crimes, and you cannot look at these women and watch them talk about what their lives are like about this, how this ruined their lives, how gross this whole thing was. And there's, according to what I read in the press, is 2 million more documents are going through. Forever, I hope you're listening, Sheldon or Jamie, but you should try to get the votes on your committee to call someone in the Justice Department and ask them where they are in response to congressional subpoena duly signed by the president to turn everything over. What have you got now? How much you have left to review? What's the process? When can we expect it? Because to people, the real issue in this story is that there was a feeling in this country, and it really got accelerated in this century, to be fair, but it exists for a long time. It's always been there. It's paranoid style American politics, Richard Hofstadter or whatever. And that is that there's elites, and they get to do one thing. They always get the best table in the restaurant. They get to go first in the airport line. They get the best investment firms. They get the best doctors. They get the best everything. And they get to play by one set of rules. The rest of us, poor slob fucks, we get a parking ticket. We got to pay it. If we don't, they boot us. We go downtown. We don't get that. And boy, this was accelerated by the decision that President Obama made, really bad, really damning, to not go after the banks that post the 2008 financial crisis. And so the reason this story won't go away, it can't go away, we don't really need to kick it that hard. We started to bring it up. The explanation is it fit into a worldview that, to be fair, no particular right-left ideology owns it, but it certainly is part of the right-wing narrative that these elites, they get away with everything and they get to do what they want, and the rest of us get to back end of the thing. And the Epstein thing digs so deep into that sort of thought process, I don't think they can get rid of it. You just can't wash it away because it's too confirming to too many people that I was right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Kathy in Southwest Florida says, do you agree a better effort after winning both houses in 26, that's a good start, Kathy, would be the impeachment of Supreme Court justices rather than Trump? It might produce better results. Kathy, James says you can only say Trump's name 3 times a day.
We're not yet. We're talking about it.
I would say Democrats don't use the word impeachment at all. It's not going to happen. I think it just play. I watched Caitlin Collins last night, David Axelrod, for whom I have great respect, debating a Republican gunslinger named Scott Jennings, for whom I have no respect. And I think Jennings kind of trapped him by saying Democrats are just going to go after impeachment. And David kind of turned it to other issues. That's what Trump wants to say. They're going to go and make a political circus out of this. It's not going to happen. There are all kinds of other issues to run on. And it's not to say, if you look at the standard for impeachment, that there aren't deserving people. But I just think it's a non-starter, James.
So the question is, if I'm correct, that the country's sick of Trump, that the country wants to move on, and if I'm correct, that I think the Democrats are going to win 2028. So the question is, what do you do about the Trump era? People will say, good people, well-meaning people, look, it was a terrible mistake. People are sick of it. We got 398 electoral votes, proofs in the pudding. When pollsters ask people what do they want to do, they want government that, doesn't look back, that concentrates on their lives. Assume all this. Then what is the smart decision? And I want us to be known as the Nuremberg Democrats. You can't, maybe it's not the savvy thing to do in 2026 or 2027, but there has to be deep consequences to this. And I think we should be very clear that the next AG is going to look at possible criminality and pursue it wherever it is. But do you use the problem doing impeachment? We've impeached him twice. After a while, it starts to lose its significance, and it looks like that. Right. But what you should do is keep building a case that you can prosecute him in 2029.
Well, the model that I would suggest more than Nuremberg would be the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think people deserve to know what happened. There may be a few people who deserve indictments, but I think if you name some, retired federal judges, people of great standing, Republicans as well as Democrats, and just give them a year, full subpoena power. I think that worked in South Africa. And I think it could work here, but it's a tough choice, James, because awful things happen, terrible things happen, and ignoring terrible things is a mistake. But getting into impeachment and everything, I think could be a mistake.
I always say that everything is contained in the Bible, and in this instance, I would describe myself as an Old Testament Democrat.
Okay. James, I always say the toughest questions for you for last. I mean, I'm sorry. This is, please don't take it personally, because this is really going to be a hard one for you. Oh, yeah. But I'm going to give it to you anyway. And it comes from Kingsley in Staten Island, New York.
Oh, wow.
And that is, do you think Bill Clinton would have defeated George W. Bush in 2000, despite being impeached in 98?
Oh, God. Yeah, first of all, Al Gore won that election. Just don't forget that. Under any way that you want to cut it, they won. Yes, he was left office with the highest approval rating, I think, anybody since World War II. I can't think of somebody left with higher than he was in the 60s. But, that's alternative history. Unfortunately, in 2000, I'll repeat again, it was widely reported that the United States, economically, culturally, and militarily, was the most ascendant nation since ancient Rome. That was 25 years ago. No one is arguing that now. Right. Maybe we made some mistakes.
Well, I would also say in 2000, if we do alternative history, in 2016, Obama would have beaten Trump like a drum.
I don't think in 2024, if we'd have had an open process, that's why winnability is everything. That's why it's so important to focus on that. And again, to my friends at Daily Kos, I love you people.
Yes, here for Daily Kos. All right. Thank you. I cannot thank you enough for those letters.
Oh, great.
This is our I guess, James, this is really our real maiden voyage for 2026, which we all hope will be better than 2025. But please keep those letters coming in, because you make us think, and we love hearing from you. Thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. As always, send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you check out the links to our sponsors. Quince in the episode show notes. We thank you for supporting Quince, because when you do, You help make this podcast happen. Now, to keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And check out our Substack at politicswarroom.com, because James and I are constantly updating and adding new content. So go take a look. You can also find other shows you might enjoy in the Politicon YouTube channel, or when you search Politicon on your favorite podcast sites. Now remember, please rate the show with a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.